Story 1. A construction company near me was pulling $100 to $200 million in revenue every year and growing constantly. Then the owner died, and his fraternity brother's son was handed the reins. Within a quarter, the employees had either been fired or quit. After 4 months, the rental companies were showing up and repossessing lifts and cranes in the middle of the day because they weren't being paid. Almost 3/4 of the employees had quit by this point because paychecks kept bouncing. Before 6 months had passed, what was left was sold for a pittance to another company that just wanted what was left of the maintenance contracts. So, it took about 6 months to destroy the company he'd been groomed to take over since he was a teenager, reducing it to rubble and leaving nothing behind. Story 2. Took a job at a technology startup in the 1990s with the promise of fast growth and opportunity. Things really took off in the second year, and we opened several more branches in different states while I was promoted to production manager. The company hired a young chief executive officer who was only a couple of years older than me. Sometimes he would stay at our location for a couple of weeks at a time, and he started driving really nice sports cars to work. When he would leave for other cities, he would leave his cars in the parking lot of our branch. There were Corvettes, Porsches, Audis, and more. After the second year of promising growth, the business suddenly stopped while the owners visited and yelled at the entire crew for not managing our money. They told us that they were in debt by over $1 million. We were all given the task of dismantling the equipment and preparing it to be sold and shipped before being let go. On our last day, when the building was empty, we all noticed that the row of sports cars was still there, and the owner had placed for sale signs on them. It turned out that they were all bought as company vehicles, and the chief executive officer had done this at each business location. We all were still yelled at in a furious rage by this chief executive officer and owner for not being responsible people. Story 3. Just saw on the news a Texas logistics company chief financial officer was sentenced to 51 months in prison for wire fraud for transferring company funds to his bank account and destroying the company, causing it to shut down and lay everyone off. The kicker is, he was convicted of the same felony in 1994, so this is the second time he had done it. Story 4. When the chief executive officer of Electronic Arts moved to being the chief executive officer of Unity, and then immediately shot himself in the foot with a 12-gauge by changing Unity's publishing policies, he caused most developers to drop the engine if he wasn't fired. Story 5. Sears paid Amazon to make their website. Amazon finishes. Sears executives say it's pointless. The internet is a fad. They give their blessings to Amazon to use the website. How is Sears doing? Story 6. Randall Stevenson, @&T. He bought DirecTV and Warner Brothers, including DC Comics, CNN, HBO, and so on, for only $175 billion between 2015 and 2018. When everyone was moving to streaming services, he thought it was a good idea to buy a cable company that was losing customers by millions and a struggling media company. Thousands of people and I lost our jobs because of it, including Randall with a $64 million retirement package. Story 7. He tried to run a nonprofit library wholesaler like a car dealership because he was a car dealership guy who knew nothing about libraries. Most of the senior staff retired and he fired the rest. Then he implemented policies that treated us all like children, such as having to put our phones in a box at the front office when we arrived at work in the morning. He hired a bunch of random high-level positions who also knew nothing about libraries. Then he criticized people who couldn't handle change because they had quit. He refused to allow us to order inventory, so libraries couldn't get extra copies when a book unexpectedly became popular. Anyway, I quit when I was handed a coworker's entire job with no extra compensation or choice in the matter, and the 60-plus-year-old company was dead within about a year or a year and a half of him becoming chief executive officer. Story 8. Whoever decided no pornography on Tumblr. Wanted or not, Tumblr was a center point for artists of all kinds, and many would create suggestive content. And when they went for it, they went hard. A program would go through and ban you if it found something a little too explicit. Traffic on Tumblr dropped by about 50% in a month. Story 9. There was the whole Walgreens Theranos debacle. Fun fact, the chief executive officer who basically ruined Walgreens became the chief executive officer of Joe & Fabrics and basically drove them into bankruptcy too. Story 10. called his own products crap to the media, and his products were jewelry, won't even last as long as a prawn sandwich. Story 11. Michael Lyon, CEO and owner of Leone Real Estate in Sacramento, expanded his father's company and brand significantly. They were an anomaly in the real estate world as a family-owned company that dominated the Sacramento region. That was until his divorce, when his wife went public with videos Michael had been secretly recording of their guests in the bedroom and bathroom. This situation worsened when the police found him secretly recording himself with a prostitute. Methamphetamine use also became part of his life. It was astonishing to witness this man's downfall in real time. Story 12. GoBear in Asia. The company received funding of €200 million in 5 years. It was the best-funded company in Southeast Asia at the time. A new chief executive officer took over and dismissed every executive team member who disagreed with him, retaining only compliant C-level executives and directors. In 2 years, the company declined and eventually closed. At its peak, it had over 200 employees. The most remarkable part is that he made the company purchase a money-lending business in the Philippines that he owned, allowing him to pocket whatever money the company had left before shutting it down. Story 13. David Zaslav and Discovery Channel bought Warner Media. They canceled highly anticipated movies that were already made, watered down HBO Max with cheap Discovery content, and instituted return-to-office policies, firing anyone who couldn't comply. Story 14. Bob Chapek's takeover of Disney in 2019. He immediately hired finance buddies into creative positions, prioritized making money via their parks, and had a quantity over quality approach with their movies. He played a role in approving an excessive number of projects, which led to overworked staff, poor quality production, and as a result, disliked projects and failing entertainment properties, mainly Marvel. Story 15. For a more serious example, there's the whole thing with United States Firearms Company and the ZIP-22. United States Firearms Company was a relatively small gun manufacturer. They were certainly never on the same scale as the likes of Colt or Fabrique Nationale, but they were reasonably successful and did find a niche for making what were and still are considered very high-quality reproductions of the Colt single-action army revolver. And then, for some inexplicable reason, the CEO decided to toss it all away in favor of his brainchild, the ZIP-22, a pistol that is generally considered to be one of the worst firearms ever made. Not only is it an extremely unreliable gun that's extremely prone to jamming, even if the thing works perfectly, the ZIP-22 is extremely awkward to hold from an ergonomics perspective. On top of that, it's also one of the most blatantly unsafe firearms ever made, since cocking the gun requires the user to place their finger directly in front of the barrel. The ZIP-22 was such an absolute disaster of a firearm that just a year after it had been released, the company was forced to shut down in its entirety. Forgotten Weapons does a fairly in-depth video about all of its myriad issues for anyone that wants to learn more about it. Story 16. Not a chief executive officer situation, but a district manager losing about 30 years worth of sales experience over a 1-month period. I worked at a cell phone store located in a great mall, and we were the best in the district. The worst location was in a seemingly better mall. The district manager decided to transfer the entire staff between the two malls, as if it wasn't the people who were the problem at the poor location. Several of us objected to this move, and we were told, "If I tell you to jump, you will say how high." One employee walked out on the spot, leaving with 5 years of experience. Within 3 days of the move, our best employee quit the company, resulting in 8 years of experience gone. A week later, I quit, taking my 6 years of experience with me. About another week later, the last remaining employee and the manager both quit on the same day, adding a total of 11 more years of experience lost. Predictably, our original store tanked and became the worst store. The supposedly better mall store remained empty for a few months. About 6 months later, I passed by my original store and it had closed down. I don't know if they relocated, but it was no longer there. It was one of those generic "we sell every carrier" companies. Story 17. A chief information officer came in and started his tenure by telling everyone during his second week there, on a Friday, that starting Monday there was absolutely no work from home. No exceptions or excuses. Human resources got involved and made it even clearer. This was before COVID-19, and it was work from home 3 days a week. Some people had moved over 2 hours away, would come into town Monday morning, stay the night, work Tuesday, and go home to work until the next Monday. Well, in information technology, it's not very prudent to not have your team be able to hop on to fix a problem. So the chief information officer would try to make exceptions in special cases, but no one would budge. So the few times some people went in, a 10-minute fix would take them 3 to 4 hours. This chief information officer also had a knack for yelling at people in public and just not being knowledgeable about anything. He took a 15-year secretary and made her an enterprise back-end developer, which she never wanted. He took an amazing developer and assigned them to one of 58 sites for a pet project where we could start pulling data without the site's permission. The site told them to leave when they realized what was going on after a few months. The thinly spread developer led to a site getting hacked and held for ransom, literally. And that's just before I left. In 2 years, the place had over 50% turnover. The old-timers who wrote the old code keeping the place running took early retirement. Middle careers like myself left. Everyone else was either new, looking for experience, or holding on for early retirement. The place collapsed. From some colleagues who stayed, I heard people were often crying in the hallways. They had to hire a morale-boosting position that did nothing. Federal requirements were falling through left and right, and the agency was getting sanctioned repeatedly. Eventually, the board wiped out the entire top management, about 10 people in a 200-person agency. But the damage was done, and to this day, recovery has not happened. I know people who took $40,000 pay cuts for other jobs just to get out of that place. Story 18, it's called the Osborne effect. Once the owner of a hugely successful computer company, Adam Osborne announced a new computer before it could be shipped. According to proponents of the Osborne effect theory, Adam Osborne damaged his company's current sales when he began showing the Osborne executive to journalists in early 1983. Dealers rapidly started canceling orders for the Osborne One in anticipation of the new executive. Unsold inventory piled up, and in spite of dramatic price cuts, the Osborne One was selling for $1,295 in July 1983 and $995 by August. Sales did not recover. Losses, already higher than expected, continued to mount, and Osborne Computer Corporation declared bankruptcy on September 13, 1983. Story 19. How about Chainsaw Al Dunlap? They called him Chainsaw because he would take over a company and cut it up into pieces. He took over Sunbeam and bankrupted it in an elaborate accounting scandal. He is on the list of worst CEOs of all time. Look him up. It is an interesting read. Story 20. Taking the profits from one business unit and continuously funneling more money and resources into the other unit, which years later still was not profitable. Also, reducing the workforce by laying off top performers from the profitable unit. The board finally caught on, and that chief executive officer was removed, but not before causing a downward spiral for the entire company. Story 21. Getting murdered stimulated a tide of revelations about how this company has treated its customers so badly. Now people are looking at open enrollment to switch. The customers will switch companies. Hopefully, this company will crash and burn. Story 22. Probably when a chief executive officer comes in and tries to cut costs by laying off the people who actually know how to run the business. Like, they save money short term but lose all the talent and experience, and the whole thing falls apart. Also, when they make some wild pivot into a market they don't understand, instant disaster. Story 23. Ruin is a strong word, but it wasn't good. The small company wanted to be bigger and have larger customers. The owners hired a chief executive officer with experience in that. The chief executive officer implemented classic corporate strategies, which didn't work well because the company had been very employee-focused, very transparent, and a good place to work. Took about 18 months, and they fired the person, and the owners stepped back in. Story 24. My personal experience involved a new manager who stopped all overtime. I was trying to keep customers happy, and he was not supportive. The overtime indicated that we needed more people, but he couldn't see it. I left, and they eventually folded. Story 25. I'll have to be vague, but a startup I worked for had some initial success and profit, And the chief executive officer responded by deciding to go and disrupt more industries and invest all of our profits into that while diverting resources from our area that actually made money. We were spread thin and failed. Story 26. I have seen chief executive officers ruin companies by chasing quick profits and ignoring employee needs and customer feedback. Cutting research and development and making impulsive decisions only creates chaos and kills long-term success. Story 27. The case of Sneaker Villa and the Manchurian chief operating officer. Any of you sneaker enthusiasts would know that Villa disappeared, but you may not know why. Our chief executive officer was very cool, but a bit naive and had to let the investors have this stern school of business chief operating officer. The guy did nothing but make enemies. The Ferguson shootings had happened. Our company employees were very upset. We flew them all out to the Philadelphia Convention Center. Our chief executive officer gives a conciliatory speech. Everyone claps. People are feeling better. The chief operating officer says, "Thanks, Jason. I just want everyone in this room to know that more white people are killed by the police each year than black people. I thought he was going to be killed. They found pictures of him having an affair. It got real racial real quick and good partners wanted out. We were sold for 1/3 of what we should have been. I truly believe the chief operating officer was a Manchurian executive. The guy wiped out $200 million off the table. Forget you, Dave.